Next, let's clear up the courts. Appeals Court upholds Title IX exemptions for religious colleges. A 3-judge panel from the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals has upheld the religious exemption for Christian colleges under Title IX, rejecting efforts to strip federal funding due to their biblical views on LGBTQ issues. In the case of Hunter et al. Versus Department of Education et al., the court unanimously supported the exemption that allows religious institutions to adhere to their doctrines without conflicting with the federal civil rights law. The decision, penned by Circuit Court Judge Milan D. Smith, Jr., emphasized the longstanding tradition of accommodating religious practices as consistent with the Establishment Clause. The Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, representing nearly 200 Christian institutions, applauded the ruling. However, the Religious Exemption Accountability Project, which filed the lawsuit on behalf of over 30 LGBTQ students, vowed to continue their fight. The lawsuit, initiated in March 2021, targeted over 20 religious colleges alleging discrimination against LGBTQ+ students. Lead plaintiff Elizabeth Hunter, a former student at Bob Jones University, described the environment as scary and harsh due to the school's behavioral rules prohibiting same-sex romantic relationships. In January 2023, U.S. District Judge Ann Aiken ruled against the plaintiffs, stating that they failed to demonstrate discriminatory intent behind the religious exemption granted by Congress decades ago. The Ninth Circuit's decision reinforces the legal precedent allowing religious institutions to maintain their doctrines while receiving federal support. So I'm going to be a bit controversial here. I think they got it right. But I think they got it right within a context that's wrong. And by that, I mean, we should have separation of church and state. And I think that's fine. Although I don't know that they should be receiving funding anyway as a religious institution.
Right.
But we have this blend of public, private, religious, not religious entities. And they're, churches that should be being taxed because they're absolutely not doing religious things should be taxed. So they got it right in this one slim instance, but the overall picture is deadly wrong.
Have you ever worked, as a professor, you have worked everywhere in a bunch of different countries. Have you ever worked for a religious institution?
No, I never have. I would never go to a place called Bob Jones.
The problem is, as soon as they receive $1 federal dollar, then it becomes public domain. That's all of our tax dollars. And we should not be funding discrimination.
Yeah. Right.
And so if you want to be private and you want to have special rules that only allow special people, then you can have your private organization, any kind of organization.
Not with my
but
tax
not
dollars.
with public
Right.
money.
Yeah.
Then you can raise your money and you can have your little whatever you want to have.
Yeah.
And it can only be for you. But as soon as you start taking public money, now you're part of the public domain. That means you have to follow federal civil rights laws.
Exactly.
And this is a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
Taking our money to fund hate. Taking the public's money and going, oh, by the way, you get to discriminate against a whole class of people. That's not acceptable. And it's totally incongruent with the actual law itself, which says you cannot. When you receive, I know in healthcare, if you receive through the Affordable Care Act, which is legislation, it's a law, it's not health insurance. It's a huge civil rights law. If you receive $1 federal dollar, you have to follow federal law, which means when somebody comes into a healthcare environment, you have to treat them a certain way by federal law.
No matter what.
No matter
Exactly.
what. It doesn't matter what your religion is. It doesn't matter what you like. They walk in the emergency room, you ask them their pronouns, you treat them. You don't have to understand anything. You don't have to like anything. But if that institution, now, if a staff member makes a comment about somebody, homophobic comments, right? That person can sue the institution and the individual for violating federal law. So why should this school get to take federal dollars but make up their own rules?
Yeah.
But nobody else can make up their own rules.
But it's so true.
Why should they receive our money at all?
It's so true. My wife
Fund your hate yourself.
But any religious institution can do that. So, or ideally, any religious institution could do that. So if you have a religious institution that's going to do something opposite, they deserve the same opportunity is the wrong word. They deserve the same right to kind of assert that religious doctrine within their school, regardless of whether or not it's a Christian doctrine.
They do, but they can't take federal money. As soon as you take federal money, you stop, the whole Christian thing goes to the side. Just like you said, we have separation of church and state. So if you want to be a church and you have private funds and you raise your money, you can do what you want. As soon as you cross the line into the public domain, you start taking federal dollars, you're no longer separating church and state. Now you're part of the state.
Yeah.
We're funding you. You have to follow federal law, period, like every other organization in the country.
That's an interesting perspective.
But it's a true.
Yeah,
I mean, think about it.
it's true,
Hospitals
yeah.
need to take care of whoever it is. If it's a
That's
a public hospital, you know, my wife has had to administer care to a murderer.
Yeah,
right.
that's
and
right.
She hasn't wanted
That's
to,
right.
but has to because
That's right.
Yeah.
he
And
needs
you
the help.
treat them the
And
same,
treat
and
them
you
the same.
ask them their pronoun because you're accepting federal dollars and you're part of America, right? And so you have to follow federal statute. The ACA is a huge civil rights law. You have to follow. These churches shouldn't get carve-outs to fund. Hey, if you want to hate people, fund it yourself.
But okay, but you have
I'm not saying you can't hate people.
Well,
I'm just saying fund it
actually, I
yourself.
think that there are a lot of religious institutions that receive tax breaks,
Yeah,
you know,
and they
that
shouldn't.
don't pay
That
taxes.
shouldn't.
That shouldn't. And this is an example of that.
Yeah.
See, and I'm going to say, I'm going to push back a little bit because I think everyone has, so the Hippocratic Oath kind of means that everyone has a right to care at some level,
Yeah.
right? There is no right to higher education. It doesn't exist. You have a right to secondary education.
Yeah, but what does that have to do with that?
Well, because
When you
instead-
take federal dollars, you have to follow federal law, period. You don't get to take federal dollars and be exempt
But we
from
have,
federal
but
law.
we have decided, right? We have decided that there are exemptions for religious institutions. That's been decided.
No, who decided that?
The whatever act.
The
That was
whatever
in the-
act.
That was
Oh.
in the story.
Yeah, but
Church
that
and
doesn't
state
mean that it's
doesn't-
wrong. That doesn't mean that that act is right.
And I'm not
Well,
saying that it's
listen,
right or wrong.
the
I'm
act
Boys,
is
saying
in
that-
violation of
I really
the
don't think
law.
it's going to be the last time that we hear about this, especially
sure.
since the girls are, you know, they filed and as they should.
And they're
you know,
appealing.
to LGBTQ plus people that want to work in these institutions, I don't understand why.
Right.
Not at all.
But you should be allowed to
Yeah.
and to be your true
Some
authentic
people
self
want to
while
change
doing
from
so.
within.
You know,
You know who taught me that? Reverend Juan. He said,
at
some
that.
people want to change from within, some people want to change from without. And he taught me something, and I've always remembered that. So if you want to be there and try to change from within, go for it. But in the meantime, stop taking federal dollars.
Stop taking federal.
And
stop taking
again,
my tax
just to
dollars.
reiterate my point is there's a much bigger problem at play here. This maybe I think this is right in this context in this way, but it's wrong in a greater context of what's going on with the whole church and state.
For
issue.
real,
Yeah.
for real.
Yeah.
Again, let's start talking about reproductive rights. You want to? You know,
We'll do
how
that
church,
on, we'll do
how
that on
church and
Saturday.
state are all over each other. Come on.
I've already decided what your reproductive rights should be.
Oh, hey. Yeah.
Bonnie, what's
Okay.
next? Get me out of here.